All right. Chapter 27. Once upon a time, one of this Earth's earlier scientists pronounced or enunciated or told a story which was somewhat reasonable of a flood and of all the animals of this Earth saved as species in a big boat. Perhaps the story was not meant seriously by its author, but was a satire upon the ambitious boat builders of his day. It is probable that all religions are founded upon ancient jokes and hoaxes, but considering the relative fewness of the animals that were known to the scientists or the satirists of that early time, this story was as plausible as the science or as the best satire of any time. However, data of such a host of animals piled up that the story of the big boat lost its plausibility. Note that our data are upon events of which the founders of the present so-called science of astronomy knew little or knew nothing. Orthodox astronomy has been systematized without considering new stars, their phenomena, and indications. It is a big boat story. Once upon a time, it was plausible. It is in the position of the orthodox geology of former times when a doctrine was formulated without consideration for fossils and sedimentary rocks. But when fossils and sedimentary rocks were incorporated, they forced a radical readjustment. New stars were not taken into the so-called science of astronomy by the builders of that system because no astronomer ever saw or reported a new star between the years 1670 and 1848. Presumably, new stars have not started appearing all at once in modern times. Presumably, in this period of 178 years, many new stars appeared and were not seen, though we shall have data for thinking that some of them shone night after night with the brilliance of first magnitude. One would like to know what, when time after time, the sky was probably spectacular with a new light the astronomers were doing in these 178 years. We may be able to answer that question if we can find out what the astronomers are doing now. There is not agreement among the wise men. Virtually there is, by the wise men of our tribes, no explanation of new stars. The collision theory is heard of most, always, provided there have been little boys and other amateurs to inform them. The wise ones tell of stars that have collided. They have never told of stars that are going to collide. Why is a story always of stars that have collided? Assuming now that, instead of being points in a revolving shell, stars are swiftly moving bodies, there must be instances of stars that are going to collide some days, weeks, or years from any given time. It is too much to assume that only dark stars collide, or the preponderance of dark stars would be so great that the sky would be black with inky waves. So far, we have not a fair impression of how frequently new stars appear. It will be said that stars that are so close to each other that in a year or so they will collide have, because of their enormous distance from the Earth, the appearance of one point of light. This takes us to one of the solemnest and laughablest of the wise men's extravagances. It is their statement that after two stars have collided, they can, by means of the spectroscope, pick out in what is to the telescope only one point of light. The fragments of an alleged collision, the velocities, and the directions of these parts. If any spectroscopist can do this thing that the reading public is told that he can do, never mind about parts where he says there has been a collision, but let him pick out a point in the sky which is of parts that are going to collide. Let him tell where a new star is going to be, otherwise let him go on being told by amateurs where a new star is. New stars appear. There are disturbances upon this earth. There are volcanic appearances in the sky. Volumes of smoke and dust roll down upon this earth. And the meaning of it all may someday be skyward ho. Storms upon a constellation's vacant areas of Poles and Russians. A black cloud appears in the sky of Lyra and downpours a deluge of Italians. Drifting sands of Scandinavians sift down to a star. January 5th, 1892, just such a fiery blast has often torn down the slopes of Vesuvius, shot across the state of Georgia. was a black tornado filled with fire. About this time, there were shocks in Italy, and in the evening, people in many parts of New York State were looking up and wondering at a glare in the sky. The next day, they had something else to wonder about. There were shocks in New York State upon the 8th. Dust that was perhaps volcanic, but that had probably been discharged from no volcano of this earth, fell from the sky in northern Indiana. 14th. Tidal wave in the Atlantic and a shock at Memphis, Tennessee. Snow fell in Mobile, Alabama, where there had been only 4 falls of snow in 70 years. Floods in New England, quakes in Japan, 15th, 16th, 17th. At this time began the eruption of Tongariro, New Zealand. Tidal wave or seismic wave in Lake Michigan upon the 18th. For references, see the New York newspapers. The Philadelphia Public Ledger, January 27th, reported a fall from the sky of a mass of fire into a town of Massachusetts upon the 20th. At this time, Rome, Italy was quaking. Shocks in France. 2 days later, shocks in Italy and Sicily. January 24th, a great meteor with thunderous detonations shot over Cape Colony, South Africa. A drought at Durango, Mexico, was broken by rain, the first to fall in 4 years. Upon the night of the 26th, there was a glare in the sky that alarmed people throughout Germany. Severest shock ever known in Tasmania upon the 27th, and shocks in many places in Victoria, Australia. In the night sky of England, people watched a luminous cloud. There was a new star. In all the observatories of this earth, not a professional astronomer had observed anything out of the ordinary. But in Edinburgh, a man who knew nothing of astronomical technicalities looked up at the sky and saw the new star night of February 1st. Throughout this period of the glares and the shocks and the seeming volcanic discharges, a new star or a new celestial volcano had been shining in the constellation Auriga. The amateur, Dr. Anderson, told the professionals. They examined photographs and learned that they had been photographing the new star since December 1st. The look of data is that volcanic dust drifted from a new star to the sky of this earth in Indiana in not more than 39 days. For 4 hours upon the 8th of January, dust came down from the sky in northern Indiana, and if it did come from regions external to this earth, it came settling down hour after hour as if to a point upon a stationary earth. I have searched in many scientific periodicals and in newspapers of all continents, finding record of no volcanic eruption upon this earth by which to explain. La Nature 41-206 that this dust had been analyzed and had been identified as of volcanic origin. Science 21-303 that this dust had been analyzed and had been identified as not of volcanic origin. Monthly Weather Review, January 1892. It was in all probability probability of volcanic origin. I have records of 5 other new stars, which from December 21st, 1896 to August 10th, 1899 appeared at times of disturbances upon this earth, times of deluges and of volcanic discharges that cannot be attributed to terrestrial volcanoes. 2 of the discoveries were made by amateurs. The other discoveries were made by professionals who, with nothing at all resembling celerity, learned by examining photographic plates that new stars that had been looked at by astronomers had been recorded by cameras. The period of one of these incelerities was 11 years. See Nature 85-248. Star after star has appeared as a minute point or as a magnificent sight in the heavens, and the professional astronomers have been unobservatory. They have been notified by amateurs. We shall have records of youngsters who have seen what they were not observing. The first of the brightest infants of whom I have record is Seth Chandler of Boston. I have it that anybody who is only 19 years old, or for that matter 29, is a youngster. Seth was 19 years old. Upon May 12, 1866, an amateur astronomer named Brigham at Tuam, Ireland, notified the professional astronomers who were looking somewhere else that there was a new star in the constellation Corona Borealis. In the United States, the professional astronomers were busily engaged looking in other directions. Upon the night of the 14th, Seth Chandler interrupted their observations, telling them that there was something to look at. For any pessimist who is interested in what becomes of exceptionally bright boys and the disappointing records of many of them, I note that when this bright youngster grew up, he became a professional astronomer. What on earth, or pretty nearly assuredly unrelated to the skies, were the professionals doing? February 1901, night of February 22nd, and Dr. Anderson, the amateur who had discovered Nova Auriga 9 years before, looked up at the constellation Perseus, and even though he had probably been befoozling himself with astronomical technicalities ever since, saw something new, and knew the new when he saw it. It was a magnificent new star. It was a splendor that scintillated over stupidity. Not a professional at any of this Earth's observatories knew of this spectacle until informed by Dr. Anderson. Usually it is said that Dr. Anderson discovered this star, but his claim has been contested. In Russia, it was recorded that 9 hours earlier, at a time when the sleepiest of observatories had not yet closed down or had not yet quite not observing, the new star had been discovered by Andreas Borisak of Kiev. Andreas was a schoolboy. Before the discovery of this new star in Perseus, or Nova Persei, there had been appearances like volcanic phenomena unattributable, however, to any volcano of this Earth. I keep saying volcano. It's volcano. Upon the morning of February 13th, deep greenish-yellow clouds spreading intensest darkness appeared in France. Upon the 16th, a black substance fell from the sky in Michigan. There was the extreme coldness that often results from interferences with sunlight by volcanic dust. At Naples, 3 persons were found to have frozen to death night of the 13th. A red substance fell with snow near Mildenhall. It may have been functionally transmitted organic matter. Pigeons seem to feed upon it. I have data for thinking that at least 4 nights before Dr. Anderson's observation, this new star, or a beam from it, though unseen at all observatories, was magnificently visible. I think so because upon the night of the 18th, somebody in Finchley, London, and somebody in Tooting, London, saw something that they thought was a comet. Upon the night of the 20th, somebody in Tottenham saw it. A story of 3 somebodies who had seen something that was missed by all this Earth's professional astronomers would not be worth much if told after an announcement of a discovery, but these observations were told of in the London Daily Mail, published upon the morning of February 22nd, before Dr. Anderson was heard from. 16 days after the Anderson observation, dust arrived upon this Earth, or it fell from the sky in volumes that were proportional to this outburst of first magnitude in the heavens. The new star at its brightest was of the magnitude of Vega, dust of the redness of many volcanic dusts, and of no African deserts that one hears anything of. And if African deserts ever are red, moving picture directors who are strong for realism, or rather sometimes are, should hear about this, fell from the sky. It came down upon the 9th and 10th of March in Sicily, Tunis, Italy, Germany, and Russia. A thick orange-red stain was reported from Ongar, Essex, England upon the 12th. The standardized explanation was published. I shall oppose it with heresy. Throughout this book, I say that all expressions of mine are only mental phenomena and sometimes may be rather awful specimens, even at that. But if we examine our opposition and find it wanting, and if my own expression includes much that it left out, my own expression is not wanting, whether it's wanted or not. 2 wise men wrote the standardized explanation. The red dust had come from an African desert. See Nature 66-41. They wrote that they had traced this dust to a hurricane in an African desert, pointing out that upon the first day it had fallen in Tunis that looked like a first fall near an African desert. But the meteorologists are not banded like the astronomers for a record of a fall not so near an alleged African desert. See Simmons Met Mag 1902-25. While this dust was falling in Tunis, also it was falling in Russia. That this dust did come to this earth from outer space, see the Chemical News 83-159. Dr. Philipson's opinion that it was meteoric. That may be accepted as the same as volcanic. My own expression. That a hurricane that could have strewn Europe with dust from the Mediterranean to Denmark and from England to Russia could have been no breeze fluttering obscurely in some African desert, but a devastating force that would have fanned all northern Africa into taking notice. Lagos, Gold Coast, Record, March, April 1901, no mention of a whirlwind of any kind in Africa. In the Egyptian Gazette, Alexandria, there is nothing relating to atmospheric disturbances. There is nothing upon any such subject noted in the Sierra Leone News. Al-Maghreb, Tangier reports the falls of dust in Europe, but mentions no raising of dust anywhere in Africa. But there was a new star. Hold on. I'll keep going. The standardized explanation is perforated with omissions. It seems unthinkable that mind upon this earth could be so bound down to this earth by this thing of gaps until we reflect that so are all nets fabricated. In Austria, while this dust was falling, the earth quaked. What could such an occurrence have to do with dust from an African desert? Omitted. But at the time of this quake, something else was seen, and it may have been a volcanic bomb that had been shot from a star. London Daily Mail, March 13th. A great meteor was seen, dust falling in Tunis. And that was told. More of the omitted. See the Levant Herald, March 11th, that while the dust was falling in Tunis, there were violent earthquakes in Algeria. Something else that was left out. See the English Mechanic, 73-96, and the Bolsac Astro de France, April 1901. That upon March 12th, ashes fell from the sky at Avellino, Italy. Vesuvius, April 1872. Krakatoa, August 1883. Charleston, August 1886. Time after time. And now May 1902. In the hollow of their ignorance, two of these conventionalists held 30,000 lives. May 1902. There was another surprise. It, too, was preceded by announcements that were published by mountains and were advertised in columns of fire upon pages of clouds. In April and May 1902, across the zone of this earth, also outside the zone, there were disturbances. More than earth-wide relations are indicated to start with. Eruptions of Mount Pelée, Martinique, began upon April 20th, the date of the Lyrids. However, in this book, I am omitting many data upon a seeming relation between dates of meteor streams and catastrophes. Then the volcano, La Soufriere, island of St. Vincent, BWI, broke out. Upon the day of an earthquake in Siberia, April 12th, mud fell from the sky in widely separated places in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. See Science NS 15-872. There may have been an eruption in some other part of one relatively small existence or organism. There may have been a new star. In the English Mechanic 75-291, a correspondent in South Africa told that in the constellation Gemini, night of April 16th, he had seen an appearance like a new red star. He thought that it might have been not a star, but a mirage of the red light of the Cape Town Lighthouse. The white houses of St. Pierre, Martinique, a white city, spread up on the slopes of Mount Pelée. Early in May, there were panics in St. Pierre. Pelée was convulsed, and the quavering city of St. Pierre shook out inhabitants. Desertion of the city was objected to by its rulers, and the governor of the island called upon two wise men, Professor Lands and Professor Doze, for an authoritative opinion. They had studied the works of Dr. Davison. There were shocks in Spain and in France. La Soufriere was of continuing violence. A volcano broke out in Mexico. Quakes in the Fiji Islands. Violent quake in Iceland. Volcanic eruption at Cook's Inlet, Alaska. Professor Lanz and Professor Doze were studying Mount Pelée, an eruption of cattle and houses and human beings in Rangoon, Burma, or the most terrible storm remembered. A remarkable meteor was seen at Calcutta in Java. The Ruang volcano broke out. There were rumblings of an extinct volcano in France, in Guatemala, with terrific electrical displays. Enormous volumes of water fell upon earthquakes. Professor Doze and Lanz announced that there was in Pelé's activity nothing to warrant the flight of the people. See Heldprin, Monte Pelé, page 71. Governor Motet ordered a cordon of soldiers to form around the city and to permit nobody to leave. Upon the 7th of May, a sky in France turned black with warning. See back. 2 other such coincidences with catastrophes. Soot and water like ink fell from the sky at Parc Saint-Marc. Upon this day, the people of Saint-Pierre were terrified by the blast from Pelé. No inhabitant of the city was permitted to leave, but as recorded by Heldprin, the captain of the steamship Orsolina did break away. They tried to hold him. The pronouncement was read to him. The officialdom threatened him, but with half a cargo, he broke away. His arrival at Havre is told of in the Daily Messenger, Paris, June 22nd. The authorities of the port of Saint-Pierre had refused to give him clearance papers, but terrified by the blast from the volcano, he had sailed without them. The people of Saint-Pierre were trying to escape, but they were bound to the town by chains of soldiers. Even in discreetly worded accounts, we read of these people running in droves in the streets, in storms of ashes turned black at all outskirts by the soldiers. They were running in whirlpools. Not one word of retreat nor of any modification came from the 2 professors. They had spoken in accordance with the dogmas of their deadly cult. Considered locally, an effusion of ashes was not considered alarming, and no relationship with wider disturbances could be admitted. The professors had spoken, and the people of Saint-Pierre were held to the town. The people were hammered and stabbed back, or they were reasoned with and persuaded to stay. Just how it was done, one has to visualize for oneself. It was done. At night, there was a lull. Then blast came from the volcano. Screaming people ran from the houses. The narrow streets of this little white city were dark with people massing one way only to gather against the military confines, sweeping some other way only to be turned back by soldiers. Had there been darkness, some of them might have escaped, but even at sea, the glare from the volcano was so intense that the crew of a passing steamship, Lord Antrim, were almost blinded. As seen from the sea, the streets hung up on the mountainside, distorted by smoke and glare, fluttered. Long, narrow crowds darkening these fluttering streets, folds of white garments of a writhing being chained, awaiting burning. Upon the morning of the 8th, the city of Saint-Pierre was bound to the stake of Mount Pelée. There was a rush of flames in the volcanic fires that burned the city. 30,000 people perished.